Hello again, William Golding here, talking about my book, Lord of the Flies. We left off at the midway point of chapter 1. There's some things I want to clarify before we move on. Some things about the exposition of the book. For example, we are introduced to two characters. They are major characters in this part of the story. The first person we meet is Ralph, the fair-haired boy. And the second is a character that we know as Piggy. We never know his real name. Unfortunately for Piggy, that becomes a stark reality as we move forward in chapter 1. But more important, what I want to discuss is the conflict between Ralph and Piggy right off the bat. And I intentionally did this. I presented to you Ralph as the fair-haired boy, a young, strapping young man of about 12 and a half years old. He's got broad shoulders. He has a nice face, a nice smile, and his countenance, in other words, the way that he looks with his face, and that's a key piece of information. By all looks, on the exterior, Ralph presents himself as being a very kind person, a very loyal person, a very trustworthy person. And we base that based upon just physical appearance. But his actions toward Piggy at the very beginning tell a different story. When Piggy first attempts to talk to Ralph, Ralph makes himself busy. I said in the narration that Ralph was busying himself, getting through the forest, getting through the tangles, getting through the festoons, getting through the creeper things, trying to advance forward, I even mention in the book that he stands on his head on 2 different occasions in the first half of this chapter, trying to distract Piggy, trying to make Piggy laugh. And he judges Piggy based upon physical appearance. Remember, Piggy is fat. Piggy has asthma. Piggy wears specs. Little like myself, so to speak. A little bit of me is in Piggy. And outside people judge Piggy based upon his physical appearance. They judge Piggy to be of no worth. Even though Piggy is very smart, he is trying to think the problem out. He keeps asking Ralph questions. Well, who knows we're here? We was attacked. Didn't you hear about the atom bomb? Don't you know that they're all dead? What are we going to do? What are we going to do to call the others? Shouldn't we have a meeting? All these things are ideas that are presented by Piggy, and Ralph completely ignores them. And then we get to the shell, the conch. Ralph is the one that spots the conch. He's the one that pulls the conch out of the water. Piggy assumes that Ralph has thought of all these things. That it's Ralph who's the natural leader because of his appearance. As I said, he's a good-looking boy. He's a kind-looking person. He would be more accepted than Piggy based upon appearances. So Piggy is hoping that there's something up there with Ralph. That there's something there that makes him a natural leader. And he assumes that Ralph finds the conch and thinks that he's going to use the conch to call the others, to call this meeting, to explain to everybody what to do. But unfortunately, this incident was all accidental. Ralph discovered the conch by accident, pulled it out by accident. It just so happened to be that Piggy knew what to do with the conch. And he was explaining all these things to Ralph. And yes, Ralph did what Piggy asked him to do, but did he really know what he was doing? Now I want to get into a little bit more about the exposition. Remember, exposition is setting, and we clearly know what the setting is. But exposition is also the mood of the story. Remember, from Ralph's perspective, the mood is very different from Piggy's perspective. Ralph's perspective is, hey, there's no adults, there's no grown-ups, there's no one here to tell us what to do. This is a beautiful island. That's why he clutches the sand to his chest. And he thinks to himself that there's no responsibility. There's no school. There's no one telling him what to do. But that's what Piggy wants. Piggy wants someone to tell him what to do. Piggy wants to have somebody in authority over him to help guide him through this problem. And Piggy's perception of the mood is quite different than Ralph's. Piggy has no intention of staying on this island. He wants to get back home. But he knows that home is gone. There is no home. It's been destroyed. So, what is Piggy to do? And he kind of brings down the mood when he talks about the atom bomb and that they're all dead and nobody don't know we're here. So that's a little bit about the exposition of the book. I want to also get more into this concept that we kind of use appearance, especially in today's world, to choose who our leaders are. And then we'll flash forward to a point in time in your history, and you've already sort of learned about this, is President John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960, a handsome young man from Massachusetts who had an interesting accent. Sort of reminds me of myself.
At 43, JFK is one of the youngest men to ever run for president. His hip approach to campaigning injects a new energy to politics.
I come to the Bronx as an old Bronx boy. I used to live in the Bronx.
The handsome young senator has a lot to overcome. But the Kennedy campaign has a plan to sell him to the country. Now, 90% of U.S. households own a television.
Good evening. The television stations of the United States are proud to provide facilities for a discussion of issues by the two major candidates for the presidency. The candidates
On September 26, 1960, 70 million people tune in to America's first televised presidential debate.
I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights.
JFK is prepped for his television appearance. The day before, he met with producers and discussed camera angles. He looks tanned and glowing.
I don't want the talents of any American to go to waste.
He is wearing a blue suit and shirt to reduce glare and stand out against the gray backdrop.
Mr. Smith, Senator Kennedy, there is no
Nixon looks exhausted. He's straight from the campaign trail and is recovering from the flu. He also has a knee injury, making him appear uncomfortable and shifty.
I wonder if you can explain that, sir.
There is no question but that we cannot discuss our internal affairs in the United States without recognizing that they have a tremendous bearing on our international position.
Mr. Vice President,
His gray suit and pale face appear to blend into the set.
Campaign issue. I'd like to follow Mr.
The visual contrast between the men damages Nixon.
Answer questions or comment upon one another's answers to questions.
Viewers think Kennedy has the edge, even though radio listeners have the opposite impression. During the debate, Kennedy's on-camera performance makes him look like a leader. And all doubts about his youth are forgotten. Studies will later show that this debate made up the minds of 4 million voters. 3 million vote for Kennedy.
At this time, we're going to continue on with the second half of chapter 1. Remember that Ralph has just blown the conch, and Piggy just saw someone coming out of the forest. A child had appeared among the palms, about 100 yards along the beach. He was a boy of perhaps 6 years, sturdy and fair, his clothes torn, his face covered with a sticky mess of fruit. His trousers had been lowered for an obvious purpose, and had only been pulled back halfway. He jumped off the palm terrace into the sand, and his trousers fell about his ankles, and he stepped out of them and trotted to the platform. Piggy helped him up. Meanwhile, Ralph continued to blow, until voices shouted in the forest. The small boy squatted in front of Ralph, looking up brightly and vertically. As he received the reassurance of something purposeful being done, he began to look satisfied, and his only clean digit, a pink thumb, slid into his mouth. Piggy leaned down to him. "What's your name?" "Johnny." Piggy muttered the name to himself and then shouted to Ralph, who was not interested because he was still blowing. His face was dark with the violent pleasure of making the stupendous noise, and his heart was making his stretched shirt shake. The shouting in the forest was nearer. Signs of life were visible now on the beach. The sand, trembling beneath the heat haze, concealed many figures in the miles of its length. Boys were making their way toward the platform through the hot, dumb sand. 3 small children, no older than Johnny, appeared startlingly close at hand where they had been gorging fruit in the forest. A dark little boy, not much younger than Piggy, parted the tangle of undergrowth, walked onto the platform, and smiled cheerfully at everybody. More and more of them came. Taking their cue from the innocent Johnny, they sat down on the fallen palm trunks and waited. Ralph continued to blow short, penetrating blasts. Piggy moved among the crowd, asking names and frowning to remember them. The children gave him the same simple obedience that they had given the men with the megaphones. Some were naked and carrying their clothes, others half naked or more or less dressed in school uniforms, gray, blue, fawn, jacketed, or jerseyed. There were badges, mottos even, stripes of color and stockings and pullovers. The heads were clustered above the trunks in the green shade, heads brown, fair, black, chestnut, sandy, mouse-colored, heads muttering, whispering, heads full of eyes that watched Ralph and speculated. Something was being done. The children who came along the beach, singly or in twos, leapt into visibility when they crossed the line from the heat haze to nearer sand. Here the eye was first attracted to a bat-like creature that danced on the sand, and only later perceived the body above it. The bat was a child's shadow, shrunk by the vertical sun into a patch between hurrying feet. Even while he blew, Ralph noticed the last pair of bodies that reached the platform above the fluttering patch of black. The 2 boys, bullet-headed with hair like tow, flung themselves down and lay grinning and panting at Ralph like dogs. They were twins. And the eye was shocked at this cheery duplication. They breathed together, they grinned together, they were chunky and vital. They raised wet lips at Ralph, but they seemed to be provided with not quite enough skin so that their profiles were blurred and their mouths were pulled open. Piggy bent his flashing glasses to them and could be heard between blasts repeating their names. Sam, Eric, Sam, Eric. And then he muddled, and the 2 twins shook their heads and pointed at each other. And the crowd laughed. At last Ralph ceased to blow and sat there, the conch trailing from one hand, his head bowed between his knees. As the echoes died away, so did the laughter, and then there was silence. Within the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along. Ralph saw it first, and watched until the intentness of his gaze drew eyes all that way. And then the creature stopped from the mirage on the clear sand, and they saw that the darkness was not all shadow, but mostly clothing. The creature was a party of boys, marching approximately in step, in two parallel lines and dressed in strangely eccentric clothing, shorts, shirts, and different garments that they carried in their hands, but each boy wore a square black cap with a silver badge on it. Their bodies, from throat to ankle, were hidden by black cloaks, which were long and had silver crosses on the left breast, and each neck was finished off with a ham-bone frill. The heat of the tropics, the descent, the search for food, and now this sweaty march along the blazing beach had given them the complexions of newly washed plums. The boy who controlled them was dressed in the same way, though his cap badge was golden. When his party was about 10 yards from the platform, he shouted an order, and they halted, gasping, sweating, swaying in the fierce light. The boy himself came forward, vaulted onto the platform with his cloak flying, and he peered into what was almost complete darkness. "Where's the man with the trumpet?" Ralph, sensing his sudden blindness, answered him. "There's no man with the trumpet, only me." The boy came close and peered down at Ralph, screwing up his face as he did so. What he saw of the fair-haired boy with the creamy shell did not seem to satisfy him. He turned quickly, with his cloak circling. "Isn't there a ship, then?" Inside the floating cloak, he was tall, thin, and bony. His hair was red beneath the black cap. His face was crumpled and freckled and ugly without silliness. Out of this face stared two light blue eyes, frustrated now, and turning, or ready to turn to anger. "Isn't there a man here?" Ralph spoke to his back. "No, we're having a meeting. Come and join in." The group of cloaked boys began to scatter from a close line, and the tall boy shouted at them, "Choir, stand still!" Wearily obedient, the choir huddled into line and stood there, swaying in the sun. Nonetheless, some began to protest faintly. "But Merridew! Please, Merridew, can't we?" And then one of the boys flopped on his face in the sand. The line broke up, and they heaved the fallen boy to the platform and let him lie. Merridew, his eyes staring, made the best of a bad job. "All right, then. Sit down. Let him alone." "But Merridew, he's always throwing a feint. He did it in Gib, and in Addis, and at the matins over the Placenta." The last piece of shot brought sniggers from the choir, who perched like black birds on the criss-cross trunks that examined Ralph with interest. Piggy asked no names. He was intimidated by this uniform superiority and this offhand authority in Merridew's voice. He shrank to the other side of Ralph and busied himself with his glasses. Merridew turned to Ralph. "Aren't there any grown-ups?" "No." Merridew sat down on the trunk and looked round the circle.
"Then we'll have to look after ourselves."
Secure on the other side of Ralph, Piggy spoke timidly.
"That's why Ralph made a meeting, so as we can decide what to do. We got most names. Those two, they're twins, Sam and Eric."
"I'm Sam. I'm Eric."
Well, which is Eric? You? No, you're Sam. I'm Sam. I'm Eric. "Well, we better have all the names," said Ralph. "So I'm Ralph." "We got most the names," said Piggy. "Got 'em just now." Kids' names, said Merridew. Why should I be Jack? I'm Merridew. Ralph turned to him quickly. This was the voice of one who knew his own mind. Then, went on Piggy,
Then that boy there,
You're talking too much. Shut up, Fatty.
His name's not Fatty. His real name's Piggy.
Piggy?
and a storm of laughter arose, and even the tiniest child joined in. For the moment, the boys were a closed circuit of sympathy with Piggy on the outside, and he went very pink. He bowed his head and cleaned his glasses again. Now let's get back to this idea. There's a conflict here between Ralph and Piggy. Ralph is seen as a leader by Piggy. Piggy trusts Ralph. He gives information to Ralph that he wants to be kept secret from everyone else, like what they used to call him at school. But Ralph violates this trust. He shares out his name to everybody, and Piggy is once again the laughingstock. Put yourself in Piggy's shoes. How would you feel? Here you go again. Being bullied, being made fun of about your physical appearance, people not taking you seriously because you happen to be fat, because you happen to have asthma, because you happen to be wearing spectacles, and that people judge you based upon your physical appearance, and because you look this way, you have no value to them. Finally, the laughter died away, and the naming continued.
Morris. Robert. Rupert. Harold. Bill. Roger. Simon.
I'm Jack.
Jack spoke. We got to decide about getting rescued. Okay, now again, we're seeing something sort of developing here. We're now going to have a challenge for authority. There's this boy who just showed up with these other members of the choir, and he's going to challenge Ralph for leadership. Pay special attention to this first engagement between these two characters, because this conflict is going to be the central conflict throughout the rest of the story. There was a buzz. One of the small boys, Henry, said he wanted to go home. Shut up, said Ralph absently. He lifted the conch. Seems to me we ought to have a chief to decide things. A chief! A chief! I ought to be chief, said Jack with simple arrogance, because I'm the chapter chorister, and I'm the head boy. I can sing C sharp. Okay, so again, Jack presents the reasons why he should be the chief. The reasons why he should be the chief is he's already a leader. He's the chapter chorister and head boy, and he can sing as high as C sharp. That's why he's in charge of the choir. Now let me ask you a question. In this situation, would you say that Jack would be the leader that you would want to vote for? What qualifications should make you a leader? That should qualify you to be elected by the public as a leader. And think back to the physical description that I gave you about Jack. Tall, skinny, bony, red hair, freckles, ugly, without silliness. Is he any better in terms of physical appearance than Piggy? Ah, but he is a leader. He has past experience. Think about when politicians talk about the reasons why they should be elected into office. The term experience comes up quite a bit. Well, I've been experienced in politics. I have been a senator. I have been in the House of Representatives for 20, 25, 30, 40 years. I deserve to be the President of the United States based upon my experience. I'm not getting too hurtful, but sometimes people have experiences and they don't learn anything from them. Instead, they continue to do things the same way all the time, and based on their record, is there any guarantee that their experience will actually benefit them in a leadership capacity? Or do we need someone else with new and fresh ideas that haven't been tried before? And hey, how can you be elected or hired requiring you to have experience if you don't have any experience? Somebody has to start somewhere. Then there was another buzz. Well then, said Jack, He hesitated. The dark boy, Roger, stood at last and he spoke up. Well, let's have a vote. Yes! Vote for Chief! Let's vote! I'm going to make another point here in the exposition, the mood, the discussion of democracy. How wonderful it is that we have democracy. How awesome is it that we have the ability to vote and choose our leaders. But are we choosing the right ones? And for what reason are we choosing our leaders? Are we choosing leaders based upon their physical appearance? Are we choosing leaders based upon their experience or lack thereof? Are we choosing our leaders based on ideas and their willingness to share their ideas? Are we electing our leaders because they have a certain party affiliation? These are all interesting questions. And look at the point that I make here. I make a metaphor here. I talk about this idea of voting, this idea of democracy as being a toy, a child's game. This toy of voting was almost as pleasing as the conch. Jack started to protest, but the clamor changed from a general wish for a chief to an election by acclaim of Ralph himself. None of the boys could have found good reason for this. Let me stop there. Take a look at that sentence. If you asked those boys why they voted for Ralph for chief, they couldn't provide an answer to you. And let's look more into this paragraph and see the reasons why they voted Ralph for chief, and see why this adds to the conflicts. None of the boys could have found good reason for this. What intelligence had been shown was traceable to Piggy. Piggy is the one with the intelligence. So far, the only person on this island who has shown any intelligence whatsoever has been Piggy. But will he be elected the chief? Why not? Ask yourself that question. Maybe even write that question in your notes. Why will Piggy not be elected leader? Why will he not even be considered to be a leader, even though he has the most intelligence out of everyone on that island? None of the boys could have found good reason for this. What intelligence had been shown was traceable to Piggy, while the most obvious leader was Jack. But there was this stillness about Ralph, that he had marked himself out. There was his size. There was his attractive appearance. And most obscuredly, yet most powerfully, there was the conch. That the being that had blown that had sat waiting for them on the platform with this delicate thing balanced on his knees, was what set him apart. The shell! Him with the shell! Ralph! Ralph! Let him be chief with the trumpet thing! All right, all right.
Who wants Jack for chief then?
With dreary obedience, the choir raised their hands.
Who wants me?
Every hand outside the choir, except for Piggy's, was raised immediately, and then Piggy too raised his hand grudgingly into the air.
I'm chief then.
Now, why would Piggy reluctantly raise his hand in the air? Is it because Ralph violated his trust? And that he is feeling the pressure of everyone around him in order to gain acceptance of everyone else, including Ralph's? That he needs to vote for Ralph? Ralph counted. Well, I'm chief then. The circle of boys broke into applause. Even the choir applauded, and freckles on Jack's face disappeared under a blush of mortification. He started up and then changed his mind, and he sat down again while the air rang. And Ralph looked at him, eager to offer something. And look how Ralph attempts to resolve this conflict between he and Jack. Does this work? Does this actually enhance the conflict between the two? He started up, he changed his mind, he sat down again while the air rang. Ralph looked at him, eager to offer him something. The choir belongs to you, of course. They could be the army, or hunters. They could be... The suffusion drained away from Jack's face. Ralph waved again for silence.
Jack's in charge of the choir. What do you want them to be?
Hunters.
Jack and Ralph smiled at each other with shy liking, and the rest began to talk eagerly, and Jack stood up. All right, choir, take off your togs. As if released from class, the choir boys stood up, chattered, piled their cloaks onto the grass. Jack laid his on the trunk by Ralph, and his gray shorts were sticking to him with sweat. Ralph glanced at them admiringly, and when Jack saw this, he explained, I tried to get over that hill, see if there was water all round, but your shell called us. Ralph smiled and held up the conch for silence. Listen, everybody. I've got to have time to think things out. I can't decide what to do straight off. If this isn't an island, we might be rescued straight away. So we got to decide if this is an island. Everybody must stay around here and wait and not go away. And 3 of us. If we take more, we'll get all mixed up and lose each other. 3 of us will go on an expedition and find out.
I'll go. And Jack.
Notice here, Ralph is thinking about who he should take with him on this expedition. His obvious choice would be Piggy. But instead, look what Ralph does. He looked round the circle of eager faces. There was no lack of boys to choose from. And Simon! The boys round Simon giggled. Okay, now something that you need to be aware of about Simon. And you're going to find this out later on, but I'm going to give you a preview of this now. There was an incident earlier in this chapter where Simon faints. Simon has a condition known as epilepsy. If you know what epilepsy is, it's uncontrollable seizures. They come on to you all at once, and you lose consciousness. And as I said, Simon has this condition. He has just passed out and had just woken up during this meeting to say his name. And now Ralph is picking this child who has this epileptic condition to go on this expedition with him rather than choosing Piggy. And look at Ralph's explanation as to why he does not choose Piggy. The boys round Simon giggled, and he stood up laughing a little, and now the pallor of his faint was over. He was a skinny, vivid little boy, with a glance coming up from under this hut of straight hair that hung down, black and coarse. He nodded at Ralph. "I'll come." "And I." Jack snatched from behind the sizable sheathed knife and clouded it into the trunk, and a buzz rose and died away, and Piggy stirred. "I'll come." Ralph turned to him. "You're no good on a job like this." "All the same, we don't want you," said Jack flatly. "Three's enough." Piggy's glasses flashed. "I was with him when we found the conch. I was with him before anyone else." Jack and the others paid no attention. There was a general dispersal. Ralph, Jack, and Simon jumped off the platform and walked along the sand past the bathing pool, and Piggy hung, bumbling behind them. "If Simon walks in the middle of us," said Ralph, "then we can talk over his head." And the 3 of them fell into step. This meant that every now and then Simon had to do a double shuffle to catch up with the others. Presently, Ralph stopped and turned back to Piggy. "Look." Jack and Simon pretended to notice nothing, and they walked on. "You can't come." Piggy's glasses were missed again, this time with humiliation. "You told them. After what I said." His face flushed and his mouth trembled. "After I said I didn't want." "What on earth are you talking about?" "About being called Piggy. I said I didn't care as long as they didn't call me Piggy. And I said not to tell, and then you went and said it straight out." Stillness descended on them. Ralph, looking with more understanding at Piggy, saw that he was hurt and crushed, and he hovered between 2 courses of apology or further insult. "But better Piggy than Fatty," he said at last, with the directness of genuine leadership. "And anyway, I'm sorry if you feel like that. Now go back, Piggy, and take the names. That's your job. Well, so long." And he turned and raced after the other 2. Piggy stood, and the rose of indignation faded slowly from his cheeks. And then he went back to the platform. Okay, I'm going to allow you to finish reading the rest of this chapter. There's more description about the island. what's there on the island. Talk about in your notes about things that the three of these children see on the expedition. Talk about what they discover and get that into your notes. And we'll resume with chapter 2 and we'll go over the last part of chapter 1 next time.